There's a moment when you realize a conversation isn't really a conversation. It's a test. And if you fail, you don't just lose an argument, you lose something much bigger. That Sunday, sitting across from my son's fiancée, I realized too late. I had already been set up to fail. It was supposed to be a simple lunch. Roast chicken, soft music in the background, sunlight spilling across the dining table like it always did. The kind of quiet, familiar Sunday that makes you believe everything in your life is stable, predictable, safe. My son, Daniel, had insisted we host. "She wants to get closer to you," he said the night before, his tone careful, too careful. "Just listen more than you talk, okay?" That should have been my first clue. Daniel had never told me how to behave in my own house, but I brushed it off. You do that as a parent. You convince yourself that small oddities are just nerves, new relationships settling into place. When they arrived, she walked in like she already belonged there. Clara, perfect posture, polished smile, the kind of presence that fills a room quietly but completely. She kissed my cheek lightly, handed me a bottle of wine I knew was too expensive to be casual, and looked around the house as if she were assessing it, not admiring, measuring. I noticed it, of course I did, but I said nothing. We sat down, plates clinked softly. Daniel kept glancing at her, like he was waiting for something, or dreading it. Clara, on the other hand, was calm. Too calm. She asked polite questions at first, about my work, about the house, about how long we'd lived there. Her tone was warm, but her eyes were always calculating. Then, somewhere between the main course and dessert, the air shifted. You don't hear it happen. You feel it. Clara set her fork down gently, smiled, and said, "I think it's time we talk about expectations." Expectations. Such a harmless word, such a dangerous one. Daniel stiffened beside her. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. His fingers tightened around his glass, just slightly. "Expectations?" I repeated, trying to keep things light. She nodded, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "Yes. Daniel and I are planning our future, and I believe clarity prevents misunderstandings." That was when I felt it. Not fear, not yet, but something off. "Of course," I said, "Array. Cat or me? Pottery inshrax." "What kind of expectations?" She didn't hesitate. "I think it's fair," she said smoothly, "that before the wedding, there's a financial commitment from your side, a gesture of support for our life together." I blinked. "A financial commitment?" Daniel looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Worry. Clara's smile didn't move. "Yes," she said, $500,000. The words didn't land all at once. They sort of floated in the air first, like they needed time to make sense. 500,000 at a Sunday lunch, between bites of roast chicken. I let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to process it as real. "I'm sorry," I said. "I must have misunderstood." "You didn't," she replied calmly. Silence stretched across the table. Even the soft music in the background felt louder now, like it was trying to fill the space where logic had just collapsed. "That's not a small request," I said carefully. "It's not a request," Clara corrected, still smiling. "It's a condition." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, just 1 second, but it told me everything, and suddenly his words from the night before came rushing back. "Just listen more than you talk." This wasn't a conversation. This was something he already knew was coming. I leaned back slightly, studying her now, not as a future daughter-in-law, but as someone sitting across from me, making a demand in my own home. "And what happens?" I asked slowly. "If I say no?" For the first time, her smile shifted. "Not gone. Just sharpened." "Then," she said gently, "we may have to reconsider whether this family dynamic works long-term." Family dynamic. Not love, not marriage, a transaction. I turned to Daniel. "You knew about this?" He didn't answer immediately, and that silence hurt more than anything she had said. "I tried to talk her out of bringing it up like this," he finally said, his voice low. "I told you, this might happen. Might happen." As if this was normal, as if this was negotiable. I looked back at Clara, still calm, still composed, waiting, not hoping, waiting, because in her mind, this wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when I would give in. And that's when something clicked. Not about the money, about the control. This wasn't about building a future. This was about setting a precedent. And I suddenly realized this lunch had never been about getting closer. It had been about seeing how far she could push. I placed my napkin down slowly, my mind racing, through every detail, every glance, every carefully chosen word she had used since walking through that door, and one thought settled in, heavier than anything else. If this was the beginning, what would the rest look like? I looked at my son again, and this time, I didn't see worry. I saw something worse, resignation, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't the first demand. It was just the first one she was willing to make in front of me. That was the word that stayed with me long after the plates had gone cold and the polite illusion of Sunday lunch had shattered. It sat there, heavy in my chest, louder than anything Clara had said, because demands can be negotiated, but resignation, that means the fight is already over. I didn't respond immediately, not to Clara, not to Daniel. I just sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch, watching them both. Clara didn't fidget. She didn't rush. She didn't try to fill the space. She waited. People like her understand something most others don't. Silence is pressure, and if you let it sit long enough, someone else will break just to escape it. But I've lived long enough to recognize pressure when I feel it, and I don't break easily. I folded my hands on the table, mirroring her posture, and said quietly, "That's a very specific number. It reflects the kind of stability we expect." She replied, without hesitation, "We. Not Daniel and I. Not a shared conversation. We." I glanced at my son again. "Do you share that expectation?" He swallowed, shifting in his seat. "I think it's important we start on solid ground." That wasn't an answer. That was something he'd been coached to say. Clara's eyes flickered toward him for the briefest second. Approval, almost invisible, but unmistakable. That's when I understood something deeper. This wasn't just manipulation. This was conditioning. "Solid ground," I repeated slowly. "And that requires $500,000 from me?" "It requires commitment," Clara corrected gently. "Financial support is simply the clearest form of that." There it was again, that calm tone, that careful phrasing. Everything sounded reasonable until you looked at what it actually meant. I leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you something, Clara. If Daniel didn't have me, if there were no assets, no safety net, would you still be sitting here planning a future with him?" For the first time, her expression didn't shift instantly, just a fraction of a pause. Then she smiled again. "Daniel's potential is part of why I'm with him. Potential, not love, not partnership. Potential. I let that sit between us." Then I nodded slowly, as if I understood. "I see." And in a way, I did. I understood exactly what she was doing. But more importantly, I understood what my son had become inside this dynamic. I pushed my chair back slightly, not standing, just creating space. "Daniel," I said, my voice softer now, more direct. "When did this start?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "This," I gestured lightly between them. "The expectations, the conditions, the negotiations." Clara's posture straightened just a little, not defensive, alert. Daniel hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "A few months ago," he said finally. "A few months." "And what happened if you disagreed?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "That's not fair," Clara began smoothly. "It's a simple question," I interrupted, still calm. Daniel exhaled slowly. "We argued. About? About priorities, about what a future should look like. And whose version won?" Silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't Clara creating it. It was Daniel. And that silence was louder than anything else in the room. Clara leaned in slightly, her voice still composed but firmer now. "I think we're drifting away from the real issue." "No," I said quietly. "I think we've finally reached it." Our eyes met, and for the first time since she walked in, I saw something behind her calm. Not fear, but calculation adjusting. She was reevaluating me. "Good. Let's be clear," she continued, her tone tightening just a fraction. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. Families support each other. They invest in each other's futures. Investment implies return," I said. "Wasgasan wa uwan wangsakwarkili. Isarnamwan sir, the kamshamwa sir warke sir, the sir duri. Wysen rewar ter, the kershawarn sir, to return here." Her smile sharpened. "A stable, successful partnership. Your son building a life that reflects well on all of us." There it was. Status, control, optics. I leaned back again, studying her. "You're very precise with your words," I said. "I believe clarity avoids confusion." "No," I replied calmly. "Clarity reveals intention." That landed. I saw it in the way her fingers tightened slightly against each other. Daniel shifted again, clearly uncomfortable now. "Can we just not do this like this?" "Like what?" I asked gently. "Like a cross-examination. I softened my tone immediately. I'm not interrogating you, Daniel. I'm trying to understand what kind of life you're walking into. Clara exhaled slowly, almost as if she were losing patience, but she caught it quickly. This isn't productive, she said. We came here to establish mutual understanding, not to be questioned. Mutual understanding requires honesty, I replied. And I've been completely honest, she said. Yes, I nodded. You have. And that was the most unsettling part. She wasn't hiding it. She was presenting it, openly, confidently, because she believed it was justified. That belief, that absolute certainty, was what made this dangerous. I turned to Daniel again, lowering my voice just enough to pull him into the moment. Do you feel supported? I asked him. He blinked. What? In this relationship, I said. Do you feel supported? Or do you feel managed? Clara's head tilted slightly. That's a loaded question. Only if the answer is uncomfortable, I said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn now. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say what's true. Another pause, longer this time. I think, he started, then stopped. Clara watched him closely now, not interrupting, not guiding, just watching, and that somehow was even more controlling. I think things have been intense, he said finally. Intense how? I asked gently. Like everything has to be decided quickly, like if I don't move fast enough, I'm falling behind. Behind what? I pressed. He hesitated again, then quietly, her expectations. The room went still. Clara didn't react immediately. But I saw it. That tiny shift again. Control slipping. Just a fraction. I have high standards, she said calmly. That's not a flaw. No, I agreed. It's not. I let that settle. Then I added, just as calmly. But imposing them without room for negotiation is. Her gaze locked onto mine. Daniel is free to walk away at any time. I nodded. And are you? That question landed harder than anything else, because for the first time, she didn't answer immediately. Of course, she said finally, but it didn't sound the same, not as certain, not as effortless. And Daniel noticed. I saw it in the way his head turned toward her, just slightly. A crack, small, but real. I leaned forward again, my voice steady. Let's strip this down to its simplest form, I said. You're asking for $500,000 as a condition for marriage. It's a contribution. It's a condition, I repeated gently. Your word. She held my gaze, didn't deny it. Fine, she said. Yes, it's a condition. I nodded once. Then here's mine. That got both their attention. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip of water, then set it down carefully. If I were to even consider something like that, I said, it would require full transparency. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. Transparency about what? About everything, I said. Your finances, your expectations, your long-term plans, legal agreements, safeguards. Daniel looked between us, confused. What are you saying? I'm saying, I replied calmly, that if this is a transaction, then we treat it like one. Clara went very still. And transactions, I continued, require sir. Silence again, but this time it wasn't pressure, it was disruption. You want to investigate me? She asked, her tone colder now. I want to understand exactly what I'm being asked to invest in, I said. You're implying, I'm stating, I interrupted gently, that trust is earned, especially at this level. Daniel shifted, clearly uneasy. Dad. I raised a hand slightly, not to silence him, but to steady the moment. This isn't about mistrust, I said. It's about clarity, the same thing Clara values. I looked back at her. You said clarity prevents misunderstandings, I added. She held my gaze, and for the first time since this began, she didn't look entirely in control, because the game had changed. She had set the terms expecting compliance, not negotiation, not resistance, and certainly not reversal. Fine, she said after a long pause. What exactly are you proposing? There it was. Engagement, not dominance, not anymore. I folded my hands again, calm, measured. A formal agreement, I said, drafted by independent legal counsel, full financial disclosure on both sides, clear terms outlining what this contribution entails, how it's protected, and what happens if the marriage ends. Daniel blinked. That's extreme. No, I said quietly. What's extreme is asking for $500,000 over lunch. That landed harder than anything else. Even Clara didn't immediately counter it. I continued, softer now. If this is truly about building a stable future, then structure shouldn't scare you. Her jaw tightened slightly. It doesn't, she said. Good, I replied. Then you won't mind putting everything in writing. Another pause. Long, heavy, and then, no, she said. Simple, clear, final. Daniel turned to her, surprised. Wait, why not? Because, she said, her voice controlled but firm, I'm not entering a relationship that starts with distrust and legal barriers. I nodded, slowly. Then we're aligned, I said. She frowned. Aligned? Yes, I said calmly, because I'm not entering one that starts with financial ultimatums. That was it, the turning point. You could feel it. The entire dynamic shifted in that moment, from negotiation to standoff. Daniel looked between us, panic starting to creep into his expression. This isn't helping. We're just… No, I said gently. This is helping. It's just not going the way you expected. He fell silent. Clara stood up then, smoothing her dress, her composure returning, but sharper now, colder. I think we're done here, she said. I didn't argue, didn't try to stop her. Daniel, she added, looking at him, we should go. He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second mattered, because for the first time, he didn't move immediately. He looked at me, really looked, and in his eyes, I didn't see resignation anymore. I saw conflict, thought, awareness, small, fragile. But there. I need a minute, he said quietly. Clara's expression tightened. Daniel, I said I need a minute. That was new, very new. She held his gaze, then exhaled sharply. Fine, she said. I'll wait outside. And just like that, she walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click. And the house felt different, lighter. Daniel sat there staring at the table. I didn't think it would go like this, he said after a moment. I know, I replied. I thought you'd just say no, or yes, not this. This? I asked gently. This breakdown, he said. I leaned back slightly. It's not a breakdown, Daniel, I said. It's clarity. He let out a quiet breath. She makes everything sound so reasonable, he admitted. Like, if I just try harder, meet her standards, things will settle. And do they? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I thought the money thing was just one step, he continued. Like once that was handled, everything would calm down. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. It would set a pattern. He looked up at me. What kind of pattern? The kind where love is conditional, I said. Where every next step comes with a new requirement. Silence. Then quietly, yeah, he said. That's how it's felt. There it was. The truth. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just honest and heavy. He rubbed his face, exhausted. I didn't realize how far it had gone. That's how it works, I said gently. It doesn't happen all at once. Another long pause. Then he looked toward the door. She's not going to change, is she? I didn't answer right away. Then, honestly, not unless she wants to, I said. And right now, she doesn't see a reason to. He nodded slowly, taking it in, accepting it. And then, after a long breath, he stood up. I should go talk to her, he said. I nodded. Whatever you decide, I added. Make sure it's a decision you can live with, not one you were pressured into. He gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, he said. I think I finally understand that. He walked to the door, paused, then looked back at me. Thanks for not just saying yes, he said. I held his gaze. I wasn't protecting the money, I said quietly. I was protecting you. He nodded once, then stepped outside. The door closed again. And this time, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clear. I don't know exactly what they said out there. I don't know how long the conversation lasted. But I do know this. Some demands don't reveal what people want. They reveal who they are. And sometimes, the most important thing you can give someone isn't support. It's the space to see the truth for themselves. That Sunday didn't end with dessert. It ended with clarity. And sometimes, that's the only thing that can save you.